professor of constitutional law from the University in Gdansk, Poland, and I have a pleasure to chair today's session, our session on climate protection, energy, crisis. As we are sorting out the problems with the mic, I will start maybe and we will continue. So first I would like to welcome you, and it's a great pleasure for me just to not only to speak a little bit but to chair. We are a bit limited by time. It's already 10:15 and we have to finish by 11:30 because there is another session starting here. Our today's subject is very important, and we all know that climate changes and the impact of climate changes on human rights in particular, this is one of the main challenges in today's constitutionalism, but for lawyers, for politicians. Climate changes impact several different constitutional fundamental rights, and it's not only the right to clean and safe environment, but it's also a wide range of other rights, such basic rights like right to life and health, food, water, sanitation, self-determination, development, housing, education, meaningful and informed participation. So all these rights and all these problems have been noticed by the UN Human Rights Council. Also, we know that there is a lot of judgments already of courts, constitutional courts, common courts, relating to the problem, and they also acknowledges these rights. So the problem of climate change and its impact on rights of people is very complex because of at least two things, I think. One is that we should keep in mind that in the global context, the most affected by climate change, they usually contribute least to these changes. And the second is that we can observe some impact of climate change now, but it also affects the right of future generations. So I know that some of our panelists would also refer to them. This is a problem that is very present, and we know that there is a very famous decision of the Federal Constitutional Court of March 2021 that will be also referred to by our panelists today. And it's also very important that it's not enough to implement this right to safe environment and provisions on constitutional provisions on climate protection to the Constitution. It's also, or even more important, to provide some effective tools to, just to implement these rights, yes, and to protect these rights. So there is a big space for courts, and we will also talk and hear about that. So we will start, in general, we will keep the order that we have in our plans, but we will have one exception, as I will ask Professor Stefanie Kisgen from Germany, from Berlin, to start, because this is she will show us a more interdisciplinary approach as the introduction, and then we will continue. And there is a time limit, unfortunately, about 7 minutes, no more, because we have to allow everyone to speak today. Yes, so thank you, and Stefanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Anna Rytel, for this kind introduction, and good morning to all of you. As you said, I would like to start with my presentation from a more general and interdisciplinary perspective, because I shed light on the topic of our panel from the perspective of leadership and innovation. So, because of the time, we directly deep dive into the topic. So, as we all know, how we deal with nature has become to the social issue of the 21st century. The consequences of climate change are a big catastrophe today, in the future, and for all of us. So we have to really think about what to do, and not only we, but 196 countries did so in 2015. They agreed in the Paris Agreement to keep the global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, and it's better to pursue efforts to keep it below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to reach these goals, there are a lot of more efforts necessary to keep it, but it's like a decline of greenhouse gas emissions and so on. But as we all know, I mean, there are a lot of efforts to keep the goal or to reach the goal. But as we also know from the research, it's not enough to keep the goal of 2 degrees Celsius to stop the climate change. So we have, on the one hand side, we have a goal of at least 2 degrees to keep the global warming. On the other hand, we have a lot of developments that shows an increase in energy demand. So at least 3 examples I want to mention. First, it's the global population. So we are almost approaching 10 billion people on our planet, so we need more energy. Second, the prosperity, we need more energy. Third, we have the developments, the very fast and ongoing developments in IT, in digitalization, in quantum computing, where we definitely will need more energy in the future. So we have a big gap. On the one hand side, we have the climate goal to stop the global warming. On the other hand, we will have a massive increase in the energy demand. So what we need on this side is we need massive innovations, and not only incremental, a little bit of innovation, but we need radical and really disruptive innovations to solve the big problem of our global planet. And this is not only a research impact from innovations research, but also in the legal system, the word or the term of innovation is supported, at least in Germany. There was a decision from March 2021 from the Federal Constitutional Court on the Climate Protection Act, and they are also mentioning the need for innovation. And when I talk about innovation, I want to underline 3 aspects. First, innovations, according to Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, an Austrian guy or researcher, 100 years ago or almost, he mentioned an innovation is not only a good idea, but the realization of a good idea, and not an evolution, but the realization of a radical new idea that brings value to the organization and to the society. Second aspect, from the legal perspective, to have innovations is a big difference for our future. So we need radical and disruptive innovations to stop the climate change. And to have the opportunity to realize disruptive or radical innovations, we need a legal framework that fosters, that support the innovation in this context, and not to stop or to prevent it. So we have to discuss the questions, how have the legal frameworks to be designed to foster, to support disruptive and radical innovations. My last point regarding the innovations is innovations need innovation goals, and innovation goals do not come from the blue. They are part of leadership. Innovation research supports that innovation needs leadership. One of the big and main tasks of leadership is to foster innovations, to lead organizations and communities with personality to realize an innovative, creative, and sustainable future. This is one of the big and main tasks of leadership. So we have to talk about leadership, and leadership, leaders are not born. There is a research about it in the twin studies. They are not born. Leadership can be taught through education. So we have to talk about leadership education on different levels, and I want to highlight one example in leadership education, because we are talking about higher education, and we are talking about leaders in legal and politics and business positions. And in this context of higher education, leadership education is the development of leadership personalities from a humanistic approach. So when we talk about development of personalities, we talk about the development of leadership competencies. To talk about leadership competencies, they cannot be learned in theory. They have to be learned in practice because you have to be aware of the consequences of leadership and your actions. So one approach is in leadership education and higher education to train the leaders by real-world projects in innovations. So, and we have one example in leadership education and higher education in Germany, which is called SAIBI. SAIBI has already done 5,000 projects in leadership education in fostering innovation projects in the industry, and 10% of these projects are almost in the radical and disruptive context, and we realize that the projects in climate change or climate protections and energy transitions are increasing, and one of the most important topics we have right now today. So I would like to summarize in a nutshell. We are talking about leadership education. Leaders are not born, but they can be taught in higher education. And we need political, legal, and business leaders who set and realize innovation goals to save the planet, to have a better, sustainable, peaceful future. And so we need a legal framework condition to foster innovations to have this better, peaceful, and sustainable future.
Yes.
This is my approach.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As we are very, very short of time, and it's better to speak 5 maybe. So please, Christina, if you could present the thesis of Gerardo for those who cannot come.
Thank you for the introduction. First of all, I would like to excuse Gerardo Codes, the head of the legal services of Iberdrola, who unfortunately is not able to be here today. So I will do my best to convey his message. Second, I would like to thank to the World Jurist Association for letting me be part of this panel. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. And third, since I believe I represent companies in this panel, I would like to focus my presentation on what I believe is the perspective of companies as regards the protection of the climate, the environment, and energy. Before starting my presentation and the main message I would like to convey here in this forum, allow me to introduce myself. Since very recently, I the Vice President General Counsel at Avangrid, the US holding company of Iberdrola. Before that, I was the head of the legal finance department. The Iberdrola Group is, with more than 170 years of history, is today a global energy leader, leading wind power producer and one of the largest energy company in the world in terms of stock market capitalization. During my intervention today, I would like to focus in 3 main messages. First one is climate change and energy security has to be seen like a dilemma or an opportunity. How utilities are key in dealing with climate change, and how, however, utilities also need a stable and predictable regulatory framework. The first question I would like to address is whether climate change and energy security is posed as the main dilemma and opportunity of this century. We are all aware that climate change is accelerating rapidly with a narrow possibility to escape of its worst environmental and socioeconomic consequences. And at the same time, geopolitical tensions are a stark reminder that energy security remains as a critical challenge for Europe. It is not a secret that climate change is the main challenge humanity is facing. And we must urgently respond to the threat of climate and to accelerate the decarbonization of the economy. We must agree on a global, ambitious and coordinated response. Consequently, acceleration of green investment is needed. If the investment pace does not pick up this year, next year the acceleration required will be even greater. And following this line of arguments, the electricity sector is the key player in decarbonization. And this is because the utilities are deploying competitive renewable technologies, digitalized distribution networks, and also competitive energy storage, like batteries or pumped hydro. Likewise, through electrification, we can address the dependence of the fossil fuels in the sectors like transport with electric vehicles, and also in heating, replacing gas and oil boilers with heat pumps. We think that the regulatory framework, the electricity sector can decarbonize between 60 and 80% more or less of the economy at the lowest cost. And all this leads us to consider that private investment is key to securing clean energy. World Health Organization declared the end of the COVID-19 as a global health emergency by May 2023, more or less, but macroeconomic consequences still persist, like the increase of public debt, the supply chain tension, inflation, and also the increase in interest rates. The acceleration of investment in renewables takes place in developed economies with attractive frameworks for the private sectors. Public sector does not have the enough source to proceed with this investment, so once again, the private sector, the private investment is key. Despite this context and after this hopeless outlook, utilities like Iberdrola are doing their homework. Companies are adopting global commitments related with net emission reduction. In the case of Iberdrola, I would like to highlight some things. Our governance and sustainability system has included environmental performance and the fight against the climate change as one of its cornerstones. Iberdrola 2030's biodiversity plan established the mechanism to achieve the ambitious goal of having a net positive impact on biodiversity by 2030. And we are expanding the scope of its services to promote decarbonization based on renewables and electrification in our customers. However, utilities also need a stable and a predictable regulatory and legal framework. In recent years, electricity and perhaps all other sectors in the economy, but perhaps our sector more dramatically, has faced numerous turbulence due to global geopolitical tensions. We can mention 4 elements: a growth in global populism, like in Mexico, Brazil, or even in Spain, which has broken the basic good principles of good regulations. Citizens' initiative in the US or the upcoming election in Spain can impact also these movements. A pandemic that has generated plans, policies, regulation of a very diverse nature with a special impact on energy sector. A gas price crisis that increased the risk of interventionist measures by the governments, and the urgent investment necessary for the climate challenge. But such investments find obstacles, for example, in permitting when deploying energy renewables. Consequently, we need a well-designed regulatory and legal framework. Bear in mind that investment in power infrastructure are extremely capital intensive and are only viable with a very long payback periods. A long-term investor like Iberdrola needs a stable legal and regulatory framework. All we know that the regulation does not have to be static, but in the design of the market, at least 3 main basic principles have to be fulfilled: efficiency and competitive markets, sustainability, and security of the markets, of supply in this case. So again, utilities like Iberdrola seek a stable, predictable, and harmonized framework. And we need also an independent regulator that is not subject to political ups and downs. Utilities are subject to several legal and regulatory risks. For example, nationalization initiatives are active in several countries, UK, US, Mexico, and justified regulatory interventions taking place here in the European Union. In the last 2 years, certain measures are affecting the investors' confidence in the European Union, like the windfall taxes, the tax on corporate income. So, because of this, the US is perceived as a more attractive market to invest for private investors, as policies are based on more carrots, less sticks. And as I have indicated before, investment in power infrastructure are extremely capital intensive, and a long-term investor may be in a need to use protection mechanisms from national jurisdiction or also international arbitration to defend its legitimate interest. For foreign investors, the question of the relationship between the international or domestic jurisdiction is not easy. It's sometimes a question of time and expertise. Depending on the matter, perhaps the international arbitration is the best remedy. Cost, effectiveness of local remedies, presence in host country. I think this is very important because we have to think about what is our objective with investment arbitration. Will it involve leaving the country or not? And the characteristics of the measure that impact the investment. And just for concluding, yes, I would like to conclude stating that, as the name of the panel states, the protection of the climate, the environment, and the energy supply are the main challenge of the present, and that from the perspective of a utility like Iberdrola, the commitment to provide clear, affordable energy is a priority, but we also need a regulator committed to legislation, predictable, harmonized, and protect our investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I changed my place just to, have
Yeah.
more influence on you. And the floor goes to a judge of the Supreme Court of Justice, and Ms. Elisabeth.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Elisabeth Lintl, and I am a judge from Germany. So with my panel, I would like to give you a short overview to the European and German climate law. The European Union sets a framework for the EU climate protection law with a regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council of the 11th of December 2018 on the governance of the Energy Union and climate action. In 2021, the EU again strengthens its climate protection targets by means of an European climate law and adapted them to international requirements, as well as presenting a proposal to reform the toolbox of measures. With a clear majority, the EU Parliament decided on the 18th April 2023 on a reform of EU climate policy, the expansion of emission trading. This is considered as a basic component of European climate policy and regulates the sale of pollution rights. So each member state shall notify to the European Commission an integrated national energy and climate plan, which should contain the targets and measures for greenhouse gas reduction by the year 2030 in the areas of decarbonation, energy efficiency, energy security, internal energy market research, innovation, and competitiveness. Furthermore, taking into account the longer-term perspective, each member state shall prepare and submit to the Commission its long-term strategy up to 2050. So the European climate law writes into law the goal set out in the European Green Deal for Europe's economy and society to become climate neutral by the year of 2050. So the European climate law includes an ambitious 2030 climate target of at least 55% reduction of net emissions of greenhouse gases compared to the year of 1990, and a commitment to ensure continuous progress in enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change in accordance with Article 7 of the Paris Agreement. So, not motivated by the European governance regulation, but probably by increasing protests of the young generation, the German federal legislator passed a new core law for the already existing climate protection legislation, the Climate Protection Law, at the end of 2019. This had already been announced in the year 2016 in the Climate Protection Plan 2050, Germany's non-binding long-term strategy under the Paris Agreement. According to the explanatory memorandum, the Climate Protection Law is a framework regulation. It is characterized by three elements: overall objectives and sectoral targets, climate protection planning, and extensive reporting systems. So the important topic in this context is the CO2 compensation and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. It must ensure that climate goals are not undermined by the threat of carbon leakage. If international partners do not share a comparable ambition to the European Union, there is a risk of carbon leakage. The European Commission is proposing a carbon border adjustment mechanism, putting a price on imports of a limited number of high pollution goods based on their carbon content for the following sectors: cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, and electricity. They are at high risk of carbon leakage because they cause high level of carbon emissions, and there is lively worldwide trading in these sectors. They cover more than 45% of CO2 output. So finally, I come to the conclusion. Countries are increasingly linking climate and trade with measures like the US Inflation Reduction Act or the European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. The common goal must be that all countries pull together to protect the environment. In this context, the risk that greenhouse gas emissions being relocated to countries outside those that pay attention to environmental protection must be ruled out. The overriding goal of environmental protection can only be achieved if all countries stick and work together. I assume that the United States of America are a reliable partner of the European here, because this is the only way to implement and realize this important goal of environmental protection. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we will swiftly go to Professor Lorenza Violini, also on future generation rights and courts. But I think as the microphones doesn't work, yeah, they don't work, so we can stay and we can just go round to make a round table. Okay. So
thank you very much for the invitation to this panel. The title of my paper is Climate Change and the Rights of Future Generations, the contribution of the court. Constitutional protection of human rights was traditionally conceived as a guarantee for existing rights holders. However, a new path of human rights education has been opened by recent constitutional development. They occurred over the last decade in parallel with the growth of awareness concerning the challenges posed by climate change. So, on one side, to date, more than 80 constitutions contain reference to the right of future generations. And on the other side, courts and judicial institutions have been prominent drivers for the growing recognition of these rights, developing a constitutional sensitivity toward them, and fostering the rise of new paradigm in human rights education. In these matters, litigation has achieved significant results thanks to the willingness of domestic judges to hold states accountable for their international commitments, such as the cut to carbon emission foreseen by the Paris Agreement. In assessing the role of courts toward future generations' rights from a constitutional point of view, I would like to address 4 short basic ideas for the sake of our time limits. So first of all, from a comparative perspective, it is very interesting to see what happened in the field, which is a migration of constitutional ideas from the global south to the global north. For example, the Supreme Court of Philippines made the first prominent reference to the rights of future generation back in 1993, in a case concerning the duty of government preservation of the environment. And following this trend, the Supreme Court of Colombia in 2018, in a case on deforestation, recognized explicitly that future generations have environmental rights and that natural resources belong to all human beings, including those who are not yet born. Second step, European countries. European countries and the European Union are today at the forefront of this trend under different angles: environmental protection, sustainability, financial sustainability, social rights protections. From the environmental perspective, the issue has become particularly relevant since the District Court of The Hague in the Netherlands found in favor of several plaintiffs by calling upon the Dutch government to act for reducing the share of global emission attributable to the Netherlands in 2015. The court's finding in the case, the Urgenda case, that the Dutch government is bound to cut emission by at least 25% by 2020 compared to the level of 1990 was appealed, but the Hague Court of Appeal confirmed the holding of the district court. And after that, there was a further appeal by the Dutch government to the Supreme Court of Netherlands, and the case was ultimately upheld by the judge, providing an exceptionally relevant example of climate change litigation by stakeholders that has been able to put pressure on courts to hold governments and the legislators accountable for failing to effectively protect the rights of future generations. One of the most significant decisions regarding the right of future generation in Europe is notably Neubauer versus Germany, decided in 2021 by the German Federal Constitutional Tribunal, as mentioned already. The Court of Karlsruhe contested the Federal Climate Change Act of 2019, elaborating on the protection of the environment enshrined in Article 28 of the German Basic Law. The issue that convinced the Constitutional Tribunal to declare the unconstitutionality of part of the legislation was that it unfairly shifted the burden of reducing emissions from present to future generations, failing to address the issues related to emission reduction after 2030. The decision, therefore, lays its foundation on the principle of proportionality, holding that available carbon budget should be equally distributed between present and future generations to avoid the right of the future generations being unequally harmed and reduced by favoring the current generation. Climate change litigation has been pursued as an avenue to protect the right of future generation, also in other European countries, albeit only sometimes successfully. For example, there is a famous case in Belgium. There, the judge, even if they found that the government violated its duty to protect the environment, refused to impose any obligation over the government on the assumption that this remedy lies outside the jurisdictional power conferred to the civil court in the Belgian system. And a similar decision was taken by the Administrative Court of Paris. So, third, very short remark. Climate change litigation moved from the national to the supranational and international arena. And this is one of the last frontiers of climate change litigation, because at present, several cases are pending before the European Court of Human Rights that has been required to adjudicate complaints lodged against France, Portugal, Switzerland, and Norway. So the European and international level is implied in climate change litigation. And this is very important because this might reinforce the efforts by domestic tribunals to build a social community aware of the threats associated with climate change. So to conclude, what is the impact on constitutional law, on the very basic idea of constitutional law, of this litigation? I want to shorten the word. Okay. One of the most important issues that we face through this litigation is the relationship between the legislation and the judiciary, which is a very important point also for constitutional law in general. But then there are different other open questions, which is what, for instance, on which scientific data are grounded environmental policies and judicial decisions, and which general principles should guide the adjudication of future generation rights. And I think that these are open questions that we can discuss in our panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Professor Mathieu from University of Paris 1, and he will continue on the constitutional protection of future generation rights, but from the French perspective, and it will be in French.
Okay.
Yes, or in
Thank you.
In French?
Thank you, it's a great pleasure to participate in this workshop and to see colleagues and friends again. Yes, I'm going to speak in French, and I hope this won't bother you, but an English text has been sent if it's easier. Comme l'a évoqué ma collègue italienne Lorenza Violini avec beaucoup de précision, la préoccupation écologique et la préservation du climat a fait apparaître une notion nouvelle. Vous l'avez laissée plutôt dans les considérations morales ou philosophiques, la notion de génération future. Aujourd'hui, la génération future, c'est une notion de droit. Les générations futures sont des sujets de droit, et évidemment, c'est une évolution qui a débuté avec le XXIe siècle, même si la notion existait historiquement bien avant, notamment en France. La prise en compte de ces générations futures a été renforcée dans les ordres constitutionnels, comme l'a évoqué à l'instant ma collègue. Je voudrais simplement, très brièvement, évoquer la situation française, les points de vue français sur la notion de génération future. Alors, d'abord, il faut rappeler qu'en France, il y a un texte constitutionnel dédié à l'environnement, qui est la Charte de l'environnement, qui a intégré la Constitution en 2005, conformément à la volonté, on le sait, du président Jacques Chirac. Et dans le 7e alinéa, le dernier paragraphe d'ailleurs, du préambule de la Charte de l'environnement, il y a un texte qui prévoit explicitement, je cite, les choix destinés à répondre aux besoins du présent ne doivent pas compromettre la capacité des générations futures à satisfaire leurs propres besoins. Donc la formule existe déjà dans le texte et elle est habituellement associée à l'article 6 de la Charte qui pose le principe de promotion du développement durable et détermine, d'un point de vue technique, un objectif à destination des pouvoirs publics. Il faut souligner, j'insiste ici, que la Charte de l'environnement avait soigneusement évité de parler de droit des générations futures. On parle de capacité des générations futures, précisément parce que dans la réflexion en 2005, on ne souhaitait pas donner des droits subjectifs à des possesseurs fantômes, à des générations fantômes, estimait-on à l'époque. Évidemment, aujourd'hui, on sait que les générations futures peuvent assujettir les générations présentes, la génération présente, et c'est une évolution qui a fait son entrée, on le sait, avec la jurisprudence qui a déjà été citée de la Cour constitutionnelle du Jurist qui a été citée tout à l'heure en 2021. Alors naturellement, le juge constitutionnel français n'a pas été insensible à l'évolution allemande et s'est engagé à sa façon dans une perspective que j'appellerais transgénérationnelle. Et à ce jour, il y a eu, à mon avis, trois étapes très rapides, très récentes. La première, le point de départ, a été d'ailleurs rendu 2 mois avant la décision du Bundesverfassungsgericht, 2 mois avant, puisque en janvier 2020, un an avant, le Conseil constitutionnel a consacré la protection de l'environnement, comme je cite, le patrimoine commun des êtres humains. Le patrimoine commun des êtres humains, ce qui inclut évidemment par hypothèse aussi ceux qui ne sont pas encore nés. Là aussi, il s'agit d'un objectif de valeur constitutionnelle qui est fondé sur le préambule de la Charte de l'environnement. Et on le voit déjà a été mis en place une logique intergénérationnelle au-delà de la génération présente. La deuxième étape, c'est une décision du 12 août 2022 qui est passée un peu inaperçue, même en France, qui concernait, alors ça concernait une loi un peu technique, une loi qui concerne des mesures d'urgence pour la protection du pouvoir d'achat. Dans ces mesures, il y avait notamment une mesure française, en raison des difficultés d'accès au gaz russe, il a fallu remettre en place des usines de production d'électricité au charbon. Et donc, dans cette mesure qui a été contestée, à cette occasion-là, le Conseil constitutionnel a accepté de mettre en balance les droits de la génération présente avec les droits de la génération future. Donc c'est une mise en équilibre tout à fait inédite, et c'est la première fois que le Conseil constitutionnel français s'est appuyé expressément sur la capacité des générations futures à satisfaire leurs propres besoins. Alors quel est l'impact? C'est comme ça l'essentiel. Quel est l'impact? Il y a une incidence immédiate d'un point de vue juridique qui concerne le degré de contrôle de la conciliation. Le Conseil constitutionnel ici conditionne la possibilité de réutiliser les centrales à charbon à une menace grave, et non pas une simple menace, une menace grave, ce qui évidemment augmente le degré de contrôle opéré. L'incidence pratique aussi, c'est que si les pouvoirs publics doivent réactiver des centrales à charbon, le surcroît d'émissions de gaz à effet de serre doit être neutralisé. Donc on a deux incidences pratiques très immédiates. La troisième étape, elle est très récente, elle date du mois dernier. En juin 2023, le Conseil constitutionnel a été saisi cette fois d'une loi qui concerne l'accélération de la réparation des installations nucléaires. Un grand enjeu en France. Et à cette occasion-là, les parlementaires ont invoqué la protection des générations futures. Alors, la décision est très longue, je n'ai pas le temps ici d'évoquer. Elle ne fait pas elle-même mention expressément des générations futures, mais le débat, en réalité implicitement, et les parlementaires avaient invoqué en contentieux constitutionnel cette mention. La question qui se pose désormais, c'est jusqu'où on peut aller, et jusqu'où ira la jurisprudence constitutionnelle française à l'égard des générations futures. Je veux simplement ici, dans le temps, évoquer deux éléments importants. Le premier élément qui crée une différence avec la situation allemande, c'est que le Conseil constitutionnel français n'est pas juge de la conventionnalité de la loi. C'est-à-dire que c'est très important puisqu'il ne peut pas s'appuyer sur les engagements internationaux, il s'appuie sur la charte de l'environnement qui est déjà très dense, mais il ne s'appuie pas sur les engagements internationaux qui, on le sait, dans la décision de la Cour de Karlsruhe, a été très importante pour imposer cette notion. Le deuxième point important, ça a été un peu évoqué par ma collègue, c'est qu'il faut rapprocher cette décision de la jurisprudence du Conseil d'État. On ne la comprend pas, il faut la comprendre dans son ensemble. La jurisprudence du Conseil d'État qui est très innovante aussi, puisqu'elle engage la responsabilité de l'État français pour manquement à engager des mesures d'adaptation au regard des enjeux de réduction des gaz à effet de serre. Et très récemment, là, il y a 2 mois, en mai, il est allé encore plus loin. Il a effectivement utilisé sa référence de l'ancienne décision, il a constaté que l'État français n'avait pas respecté ses engagements et il en a rajouté. Il a rajouté une injonction supplémentaire, il a demandé un examen intermédiaire. Autrement dit, lui-même, il va vérifier la bonne exécution des injonctions qu'il avait données antérieurement. Et ça, sur un plan contentieux, c'est tout à fait inédit et ça renforce effectivement le poids du juge. La date aujourd'hui, c'est 30 juin 2024. Et en 30 juin 2024, il y aura, c'est sûr, une 3e décision qui ira encore un peu plus loin. Alors, bien sûr, pour conclure, je vais simplement souligner que le Conseil constitutionnel français, comme d'ailleurs pas plus qu'un autre juge constitutionnel, ne peut pas remédier tout seul à la toute-puissance du temps présent. Il y a plusieurs limites à cela, il y a des limites techniques que je n'évoquerai pas. La première d'entre elles, c'est l'appréciation des risques. Le juge constitutionnel est limité dans son contrôle puisqu'il doit se limiter à l'inadéquation manifeste, comme on dit en contentieux français. L'inadéquation manifeste inadequacy. Évidemment, ça limite son contrôle. Il doit nécessairement s'en tenir à ce qui est dit par le législateur. L'autre limite est plus fondamentale, et je conclue par ça, beaucoup plus fondamentale. Réussir à intégrer le temps long dans l'action publique. Comment réussir à intégrer le temps long dans l'action publique? C'est ça, à mon avis, l'enjeu fondamental, et c'est une difficulté que nous connaissons aussi en France. La prise en compte des générations futures n'est pas qu'une question de garantie des droits. Ce n'est pas qu'une question de consacrer une fois de plus. On a beaucoup d'outils juridiques pour le faire. Ce n'est pas une question de garantie des droits, à mon avis. Ce n'est plus cela. C'est d'abord une question de séparation des pouvoirs. C'est une question de un besoin de repenser la séparation des pouvoirs. Il y a ici beaucoup d'éléments, évidemment, qui pourraient être évoqués. Mais je pense que ça appelle une nouvelle forme de constitutionnalisme susceptible de limiter l'action humaine vis-à-vis, au fond, de l'ensemble du monde vivant. Et c'est un des grands défis, à mon avis, pour les juristes contemporains, qui nous appartient, et je termine, nous appartient d'en trouver évidemment les outils, la concrétisation, parce que sans concrétisation, nous sommes des juristes, nous le savons bien, la consécration de ces grands principes solennels ne sert à rien, si ce n'est qu'à créer beaucoup de frustration. Merci.
Thank you all for this discipline, this respecting time, so this respecting the rights of other panelists that we have today. And the next speaker is Dr. Wolfgang Weiss from Germany, who will refer to today's topic in the context of agriculture sector. Yes? Yes. Please.
central challenge is conserving natural resources and protecting environment. The focus of transformation of the economy is thus on sustainability. At the heart of this European initiative is the so-called Green Deal. The Green Deal is a European new growth strategy aiming to transform the European Union into a fairer and more prosperous society with a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy with no net emission of greenhouse gases by 2060. The point is to achieve a more effective use of resources. In other words, to decouple resource use from waste production. Ultimately, the Green Deal brings the goal of economic growth with climate and environmental protection. Central to this idea that economic growth can be decoupled from resource consumption. But there is still a long way to go to reach this goal. If I think of, for example, electrocars, I'm not sure or how many resources are needed for those cars. The Green Deal was born before beginning of the war against Ukraine. At present time, it is very important that the United States of America and the European Union show solidarity and stand united against the aggressor Russia. And this is especially important in the area of energy supply, which is of existential importance for agriculture, since energy in form of natural gas is a crucial raw material for fertilizer, which are so necessary for global food security. At the moment, however, cheap imports of fertilizers and urea, what is a core fertilizer, especially from Russia and China, are flooding onto the European market and endangering European industry, as they can produce in China and Russia under different conditions, since natural gas is much cheaper there than in the European Union. Only few people will be aware that we are directly supporting Russia as a warlord in the Ukrainian war through these cheap, not sanctioned imports produced from natural gas. To come to the closing of my short presentation, if this ambitious goal of climate neutrality is to be achieved, everyone must pull together: the European Union, the United States of America, and all other countries of the world. I am firmly convinced that the United States of America is a permanently reliable partner. Only if we stand all together, risks resulting from climate change, wars, hardship for people can be combated permanently and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is my colleague from Poland, Professor Andrzej Jackiewicz from the University of Bialystok. And as it was mentioned, we need concrete innovations and solutions to combat or minimize climate change effects on human rights. So maybe ombudsman for future generations, a good idea. So Andrzej, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will use the microphone. They seem to be silent, but as far as I know, they are recording us. So, okay, so two parts of my speech. The first one, most important part, is the thanks for the organizers for possibility of being here, especially to Professor Rainer Arnold for the invitation. And the second part, hardest part, because it's so hard to say something with sense in 5 minutes. But I will give a try, and I will continue this constitutional law perspective, because I'm a constitutional lawyer, and I would like to refer to the sphere of the implementation of these climate and environmental policies, and in doing so, I will try to point out some specific situation of Poland, where we are witnessing a particular conflict in these fields with economic interests and issues related to the energy. As we have already heard today, climate protection and environmental issues find their place in various agreements and policies of international organizations that set specific goals for individual states to achieve. But sometimes the states themselves also set some even more ambitious targets in their national law. And of course, we are all aware that even the best policies require implementation, which is sometimes difficult because these policies may compete with some other priorities of the states, such as national security, energy security, some geopolitical situation in Poland, especially connected with the war in Ukraine. And it is particularly noticeable if we take into account the interests of political parties and their desire to gain the power and maintain in the power at the cost at all costs, especially at the cost of electoral promises, as we see, for example, in Poland. And it is worth emphasizing that the Polish constitution contains many provisions about the environmental protection, sustainable development, and many other issues crucial from the point of view of future generations. And these are not, however, the priorities of all subsequent governments in Poland since the systemic transformations. In fact, one could say that they are at the bottom of the list of these priorities. Maybe several last years, something has changed, but it is not enough for sure. And in my opinion, it is this very issue that it is the everyday political competition in some countries that can block the implementation of climate and environmental policies, particularly in countries with a weak democracy. And in these countries, like in Poland, short-sighted political aims and desire about power can effectively dominate over the long-term goals of climate and environmental protection. I can give you many examples from Poland of such situations. I give you just one. The Poland is basing its energy policy on expensive, inefficient coal. And in this case, the Poland is explaining it by the consideration of energy security, while one of the main breaks on moving away from this energy sector, this energy way, for many years has been the fear of those in power of losing the votes of the miners and their families. So we see some conflict of interest. Politics, energy, and the second side, the climate and environment. So these observations of the political system in Poland lead to the formulations of the lege ferenda proposal for the introduction of the ombudsman for future generations. And another reason important from the perspective of constitutional law, which may also serve as a lesson to other states, why an ombudsman when the natural guardian seems to be a constitutional court, and this German constitutional court judgment is the best example. Why? Because the Polish example of political hijacking and or we say even political capture of constitutional tribunal, and now additional paralysis of the constitutional tribunal shows that it is certainly not sufficient. So what should this ombudsman be like? Firstly, caring for the interest of the future generations requires a break from the perspective of short-term political interest, and therefore the depolitization of such an authority. This in turn requires an institution with a properly secured constitutional status. Since Polish political practice shows that any authority with its legal basis only in an ordinary law is at the mercy of the parliamentary majority. And such an ombudsman cannot be able to be effective considering the very likely conflict of interest, the short-term interest of those in power and the long-term interest of future generations. And the second issue is method of appointment, of course, and in my opinion, it should involve both chambers of parliament, but at the same time enforcing a broad political consensus involving also the opposition in the process of agreeing on a candidate. So this would therefore require, for example, a 3/5 majority, at least in the first chamber of parliament. The next point is that this kind of ombudsman cannot be dismissed, of course with the exceptional situations like the resignation or illness. The next point is the term of office. It certainly must exceed the framework of a 4-year parliamentary term, like in Poland, And in my view, at least 6 years with the impossibility of re-election, so that the acting ombudsman doesn't be tempted to become compliant with the parliament in the hope of being re-elected. And of course, the key issue of the ombudsman are their competences, his or her competences. And in my view, the key ones are right to propose amendments to any draft bill during the legislative proceedings. Nextly, right to request the Constitutional Tribunal to examine the constitutionality of any legislation. Nextly, right to complain about administrative decisions to administrative courts. And finally, right to appeal common court judgments in the interest of the future generations. And of course, all of this should be used only in the issues of the rights of the future generations. And two more remarks at the end. Of course, I'm aware that the proper functioning of the constitutional system in accordance with the rule of law, of the democracy values, is essential for the effective performance of future generations ombudsman, because even the best constructed ombudsman will do nothing in a legal environment where politics has primacy over the law. And my final remark, and the question as well. Extremely important issue, however, will be the very person holding the office, particularly in the context of the question of whether a person from this generation can effectively look after the interest of a generation to which he or she will not belong after all. And maybe some of the answer to this question is the issue of this leadership. Maybe it is about education. Maybe it's this, but I will this question to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And our last panelist today, yes, if you wish, it would be maybe better. The microphone. Our last panelist is the director of the European Integration Research Center from Georgia, from National University, and at the end we will have some more global perspective.
Okay, it's always challenging to be the last one because there is almost no time. Or then there is also there is another point, you can use all the remaining time, of course, if the chair would allow that. But I'm very happy, to say the least, to be here today, and very delighted. And what I wanted to share my perspective on today is basically we are all speaking on the similar problem, similar issue, but from different perspectives. I will be touching upon the governance regulation. I will, of course, be touching upon on the European Green Deal as well, but from different perspectives. And my perspective is that I'm actually putting this discussion beyond the EU members framework, and I will be actually putting the emphasis on the third countries. So I will basically tell you that we are also using almost a similar normative framework that you in the European Union use, but of course different rules and different standards apply in this context. Just to put it in a bit of a bigger context, what we know currently are two things. The future is certainly green, or there is no future at all, or there is a green transition which basically will be changing the lives of many by disaster or by design. So we all want to be that change by design, so we need to think about that. Do we have a manual at hand? We don't have any comprehensive manual, although we do have some success in this process. But still possessing the manual, it's still far beyond of what we can claim today. But we have the good examples, and the European Union is one of those examples, which basically stands as a beacon of hope and inspiration today. And what is important, especially in the third countries context, is that EU does realize that it is not alone in this battle, and it needs to cooperate with much broader stakeholders, and this is exactly where the third countries elements actually kick in. Because emissions do not respect any national borders, it cannot be mitigated within the European Union only, but it actually needs to be struggled in other countries as well. And the theory, what the European Union is actually following, is called Europeanization, in which obviously it actually provides this so-called external governance And within this term of external governance, it actually tries to create the twin incentive structures between the EU policymakers and the external stakeholders. But, and then obviously this is exactly where the climate law kicks in, because it's one of the key foreign policy frameworks or the pillars that the European Union is currently executing. You may very rightly ask, what is the climate law per se? Because we, unfortunately, that's the bad news, obviously, that we don't have any clear-cut definition of what climate law constitutes. Huh? I mean, if you have one, please share this with me, because I would be happy to hear the opinion, but there is no predefined formula. We are creating this on the way as we work. Huh? Obviously, it has started over this UNFCCC framework with mere understanding of stabilizing the greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not the case anymore. It actually encompasses now, I mean, climate law now encompasses much broader perspectives, such as social economic principles and perspectives and governance, and also it regulates the issues related to sustainable development and very much popular currently, this climate justice or discourse. And this is the approach in which context the European Union tries to basically expand the scope and put it under the external governance setup. And here the idea of the climate neutrality diplomacy kicks in. In other words, it's also called the European Green Deal, obviously, because the one main, it has been already explained very well by the colleague here, that what the general idea behind the European Green Deal is. But what I'm also arguing, sort of adding my argument to this discussion, is that European Green Deal also has a very strong external ramifications. The legal question might come in now here, saying that we don't have any sort of concrete external energy and climate power of the Europe. Yeah, it is not granted through the TFEUs or the general framework of the European Union. But what the Green Deal advocates is that it actually creates the partnerships, very strong partnerships, in order to be mitigated the climate framework problems beyond the scope of the European Union. And for that, it also creates the different setup of the enforcement measures. And one of the examples I wanted to actually sort of finish my key messages here today is that the European Union, for example, creates the organization which is called the Energy Community, which is actually the organization which invites the former socialistic countries to create much more stable and liberalized energy markets. And one of the key instruments of this organization using is actually the governance regulation. So my point in the beginning, that we are using pretty much the similar tools and instruments of how we are designing our climate energy policies in the third countries context, is exactly the same. So we are using the normative framework which the EU is actually granting us as well. It is called the legal approximation, legal harmonization standards and principles, in which context we are actually harmonizing our legal standards to the conditions that is set up by the European Union. And again, the mechanics of the governance regulation, which is known for the European Union countries, for example, NECP, LTS, and so, is also effective in the third countries, which are basically part of the energy community setup. So just to very quickly summarize, maybe 4 key points that I wanted to address. The EU recognizes the need of mitigating the processes or the risks from the climate, which cannot be happening only in the EU, but also involves the outer world. The second message I wanted to deliver is that the European Green Deal has this strong external ramification framework, which is effective in the third countries context as well. Then we have the governance regulation, which is legally binding within the context of the energy community countries, creating the setup of designing the climate policy. So basically reflecting to my point in the beginning, we need to design. We don't need to be exposed to the disaster, but rather designing. And finally, it actually takes the whole plethora of the European Green Deal related legislation as well. CBAM has been mentioned, for example, and other parts of the new Green Deal related legislation, which is also applicable in the third countries context. And what the EU needs to do more is to measure the progress. It is being done currently with different and multiple setups, but maybe stronger emphasis on how to measure the progress of the third countries partnering with the EU might be advised and recommended. These can be open questions again, but I'm not sure how much time we have left for that. But with that, back to you. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank to all panelists for your interesting papers. They are very inspiring for discussions. Unfortunately, it's just 11:30, so it's time to close our session. But it's not the end, but this is the beginning of the whole day experience, so I think we can discuss it outside that room during breaks at the panels. So thank you very much once more.
Thank you.